Right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first digital Jobs to be Done meetup. I see many people I recognise in the list from some of our in-person meetups that we've run in the past in London, but I see a lot of new names too, and there's been quite a few new sign-ups to the meetup group recently as well. So let me give everyone a quick intro, especially for those who are first timers. My name is Ryan Garner. I have been kind of using Jobs to be Done for a long time, and I currently work at 11FS, and I head up our customer strategy team there. And I guess Jobs to be Done is one of the main ways we kind of identify growth opportunities for financial services businesses that are making that kind of shift to digital. And it's an integral part of our design process and just generally helping businesses become more human-centric. And so our organization kind of uses Jobs to be Done, and we set this community up because we wanted to speak to other organizations that were interested in Jobs to be Done or indeed using Jobs to be Done, and for everyone to be able to kind of share their experiences and learn from each other. And over the years, we've kind of run a number of different meetups, and members of this community and people that I see in the list here as well have contributed to that and given some really great talks and presentations in the past. And that kind of ranges from like their approaches to it and the kind of methods they've used and right through to the insights they have gained. Today we have Alan and Yann with us here. They are both sharing the findings from some of their kind of Jobs to be Done research that they conducted during the pandemic that we've all been living through recently. So I'm delighted to have them here and for them to share their work with us. So let's kick off with Alan. Alan is very active in the Jobs to be Done world. He's written books, When Coffee and Kale Compete, and I think he's got another one on the way soon. He's the editor of Jobs to be Done info, jtbd.info, and he's very active on Twitter and generally very engaged with anyone kind of wanting to talk about Jobs to be Done. So it's a pleasure to have him here, and let's hand over to you, Alan.
All right, great. Ryan, am I coming through all right? Just want to make sure.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. So I will share my screen. I believe I can do that. Okay, great. All right. Cool. So are you seeing my screen, how COVID-19 affected willingness to hire? Sorry, let's make sure. There we go. Sorry, the Zoom just kind of threw away all my windows. Okay, great. So 15 minutes. So I got to run through this pretty quick because there's a lot of interesting things to talk about, and people always have lots of questions. So what prompted this research was over at Revealed, we're always looking to improve jobs theory, and we do that as you would with any other scientific endeavor, right? You look at historical data and you do your best to create models that explain why that phenomenon happens, but then you test those models through conducting experiments and creating predictions and seeing how those work out. So this study was really about, can our existing models that we've been improving and we're planning and updating in the new book, how well do they explain and help us understand and predict this Peloton phenomenon? So that's what prompted this, and I'm just going to zip right through it because again, I only have about 15 minutes. So title is How COVID-19 Affected Willingness to Hire. Willingness to hire is a term that we created to describe the phenomenon of, how likely or probable is someone to hire a product for a job to be done. It's different than a willingness to pay, because a willingness to pay output of that calculation, which is common in economic theories, just outputs a dollar amount, but doesn't actually say why that dollar amount is relevant or not, or will that dollar amount be acceptable enough to predict or precipitate an adoption. Right. So that's kind of what willingness to hire is different. All right, so I'll just kind of zip through a very simple presentation here. So when we're investigating willingness to hire, we're looking at several different processes to investigate. So we're looking at what are the heuristics that consumers use to determine whether or not should I hire this product. So today I'm going to talk about, with regards to the Peloton, how needs were created, what needs consumers attached to the Peloton bike when they saw it, the choice set construction that consumers went through as they were shopping, and then in particular to the Peloton, how was trust building executed, how do they imagine use, the novelty assessment process, information foraging, so how were they going out and gathering information, and of course, how were they calculating willingness to pay for that. So you may not understand these right now, but as I go through each of these and explain the data and what we observed, you'll begin to understand them individually. So basically, yeah, the first one, how are the needs created? So we're going to look at the catalysts, the things that really usually trigger the shopping process, but even before that, trigger need creation, which in this case, Peloton, very great example of how it's not so cut and dry. I will skip that for right now. So for us, we really observed that you would think, well, simply people looked at the Peloton because the gym's closed and so on and so forth. But that's not really it. The COVID-19 taking away people's supply was a catalyst, but it was, a lower order catalyst, right? It happened further in the past. There were actually more higher order catalysts closer to the moment of hiring, which were better predictors of whether or not they would adopt the product or not. And so I have kind of three stories that kind of articulate this, kind of how this phenomenon happens. So the first one is I have here Randy. So this was interesting. So this was an example of how someone who had no needs, things were fine, but he was anticipating needs being created. So in his particular example, he saw the pandemic rising, he's in Boston, and he's thinking about, where am I going to move? And so actually he was going to SoulCycle classes, he was spinning, he was happy, everything's fine, but he was already planning on moving. So that's when he started shopping and thinking about buying a Peloton. So it wasn't so much that he had the classes shut down and then things started going sour for him. He was anticipating these needs existing in the future, which happens, I can talk about later on, that happens in markets where you have a group of consumers who are very experienced with the needs and the supply. But that was definitely a phenomenon that we saw. The other, probably more common, were people reacting to their needs being taken over, reacting to needs being created because the supply was created, or taken away from them. So they would be, so I'll use Sejal and Jenny here. So those two, for example, Jenny was a competitive curler. That's that sport where they do the thing in the ice and the thing comes on. So for her scenario was the gym's closed, and then about 2 or 3 months passed, and then that's when kind of health-related needs started coming up. She started having, and I'll get to what those needs were later on. Mental issues, feeling alone, getting out of shape, so on and so forth. So it was a reaction to these needs being created that prompted her to consider something like Peloton. But a third interesting phenomenon which again makes sense later on when we get into the imagined use issue or concern with Peloton. I'll use Sandy as an example. So for her, and this happened also pretty frequently, a lot of people only got the Peloton bike because they knew someone or someone in their household bought one. And then, because they thought, like in her case, she had no interest in the Peloton bike. She was just fine the way it was, the COVID thing hits, and then she's like, well, okay, instead of just going to my spin class once a week, I'll just, go outside and cycle once a week, whatever, right? But then her boyfriend gets a Peloton bike and basically pushes or insists that she try it out and use it. And then once she used it for the first time, that's when the need for it was created, right? So that's when she thought in her mind, oh my gosh, this is something that can actually help me lose weight, improve my mental fitness, connect me with the community. So that was another phenomenon that we saw happen quite frequently. People would be exposed to the Peloton bike for the first time, be kind of egged into using it, and then through using it, they would start to want it. So we had three very interesting patterns, we would say, regarding need creation. So next thing, job to be done construction, right? So when consumers did see the Peloton bike, or in the case of someone like Sandy, when they actually used it, how do they start attaching to it? What was the new need they were imagining in their brain when they looked at the Peloton bike? So in this case, we really only found, we would say, one job to be done associated with the Peloton bike. When we're talking about job to be done, we call it like a need pattern. And that, as I kind of say here, that happens pretty commonly in consumer goods, because physical products are just bound by what they can do. The software products usually have multiple jobs that they're hired for, but most of the time physical products are really hired for one need pattern within the market. And so that happened very much with the Peloton bike. But another reason why that happened, which I allude to later on, was that when consumers were constructing their choice set, they only looked at the Peloton bike. So I think it's probably another reason why there was only one job to be done, that consumers attached to the Peloton bike, because this is actually extremely rare. Everyone we talked to only looked at the Peloton bike. So there was no comparing to other options. So, and there's a reason for that, which we'll get to later on. And I mentioned before, the only real difference between how people were constructing this job to be done was it anticipating or was it precipitated? Meaning, was this someone imagining, if I don't get a Peloton, here's all the bad things that will happen to me, here's what I'm going to lose? Or is it, oh my gosh, my life has really gone south, the Peloton bike is something that can help me get back on track? So some of the needs, so we break up needs into two categories: environmental needs, which is very much focused on the consumer themselves and kind of exist over a longer period of time than just kind of needs associated with just using the product. And these are pretty standard, and I don't think the COVID really affected their needs very much, other than in ways I kind of underlined here. So like, for example, when we look at a constraint, like the top one there, around, I'm not as physically fit as I should be, COVID did introduce some new constraints. So things like outdoor exercise can be dangerous, or like, for example, this one guy in particular, he said, hey, I'm running down the street or running outside, but as it happens, so are lots of other people. So now I'm concerned about exercising outdoors now because I'm outside with everyone else and I don't want to wear a mask when I'm running. So that was a new catalyst that COVID introduced. And of course, as you would imagine, the other constraint would just be there's a lack of supply. So people would have these needs, but there would be little or no supply in the market that they could hire for it. Let me think here. Yep, so that's basically it. Or, that's really just it. It was lack of supply or this other constraint around outdoor activities are either denied or risky for me. The use needs, I don't really want to spend much time on this because it's pretty much what you would expect, and I don't think that COVID really had any affectation on these needs. I'm pretty sure these are the same needs that people would have attached to the product if we had did this a year ago. So in this case, no new COVID-related needs regarding to actually using the product. Typical stuff, right? Instructors should know me. I want to be able to make sure that I can share my workouts with other people. I want to make sure the classes are exciting. It should be as easy to use. You know, it shouldn't hurt my joints and my butt. Typical stuff. So next thing, choice set construction. So this was interesting when we were kind of talking with consumers. So, and again, this has maybe happened once before. I think we did a study about why people adopt Salesforce, and pretty much again that was a scenario where people didn't really shop. It was just, well, Salesforce is the #1 CRM. I saw an ad about it, so that's why I bought it. So kind of similar to here, right? Where, and this is, and I think I talk this later on. Yeah, I guess it comes back to the trust building part, but it's really, this is a master class. If anyone out there is in marketing and promotion, Peloton is a master class of how to basically make it so your product does not compete with anything else. It was just shocking how everyone just thought, well, you know, I want I want to be able to do spin or exercise at home. Their equals get a Peloton. It was quite stunning how that was. And when people did think about alternatives, you know, maybe it would just be like, well, let me just make sure it really is the best bike. So, you know, their shopping or their choice set construction was not so much about an earnest investigation. It was really, well, you know, I just want to make sure that, you know, my assumption about Peloton is correct. So I thought that was, you know, again, I think we probably could do a whole session just on how brilliant Peloton's promotional and marketing efforts have been on just that phenomenon. Trust building. So we want to investigate, why did consumers think it was safe to hire the Peloton bike? So we found here the factors that we found that affected that phenomenon. So things that increased trust was brand awareness via network effects. So, you know, typical, but that you would imagine, but it was really did have a big effect with Peloton. So consumers had been seeing posts on their friends on Instagram, or not Twitter, it was always Instagram. You know, their friends posting their workouts or their metrics, like, you know, like, I did an amazing workout, look how fast I did this. And so that was really planting a seed in their mind that, yes, other people are buying this and using it and making progress, so therefore it's safe for me to use. Another thing, right, which is really fascinating, was seeing delivery vans. This is, again, going back to that like really brilliant promotional and growth strategy that Peloton did here. Was, see, it makes sense now, right? At the time, it didn't make sense, but after doing this analysis, it makes sense. See, if a brand just buys, like, say, for example, a billboard, you know, you'll just think, well, yeah, they just bought that billboard space, whatever. But because, I mean, almost everyone said they saw Peloton delivery vans. So to them, like, when they see a Peloton delivery van driving, you know, they're at home looking at TV, or at home watching TV, or looking out the window, or whatever it is, they're seeing Peloton vans drive around. They're thinking, that's someone buying a Peloton. That's someone buying a Peloton. So that's increasing trust in the brand that, yes, people are buying this thing and it can deliver upon the promises. Some other phenomenon that increased trust that are maybe not so relevant as the other ones that you would kind of expect. Peloton stores was pretty big. People, again, going back, thinking about Sandy, a lot of people actually had to use the bike before they started wanting it. And actually that reminds me of that Steve Jobs quote, right? Sometimes you have to show consumers, what is it? I'm sure someone can Google and find it. Like, they won't know it until they see it, something like that. Sometimes you have to show it to them before they want it, something like that. perfect example, right? And there's actually a reason for that, which we'll get to later on. Friends asking about it, a lot of people told us that in the past they had friends and family asking them, oh, I'm thinking about getting a Peloton, what do you think? And of course, social media. Factors that we found decreased the trust were scenarios where people, and again, this is how people maybe used to think, I'm not going to get a Peloton, how they switched to, I do want a Peloton. And some people would describe it in a negative way as elitist or bourgeois, like a bourgeoisie, or cultist, like, oh, those Peloton people, they all wear the hats. That's a little weird for me. A good example that would be Sandy. So same before, she had to use the bike before she wanted it, but for her, in her mind, she still had this perception of like, well, that's like those weirdos do that, so I'm not going to get into that. Another interesting thing that we found decreased of trust was higher order effects of controversial ads. Remember that ad that happened, whatever, in November? A few people talked about that, where they remember seeing the ad. But here's the interesting thing, though. It's not that they saw the ad and thought, oh, God, they're Peloton sexist or whatever. It was, if I get a Peloton, what will people think about me? So they're not reacting to like a personal anxiety about that. They're more reacting to, oh, what's that social construction now? What's that social opinion about Peloton? And if I get one, will I be associated with that? That was interesting. But I think, of course, that was overcome by the stuff on the left, right? And then another thing was, again, historical prejudice about at-home exercise equipment. Again, people who were historically had said, yeah, I saw the Peloton, but no way, because, it just looks like an expensive laundry drying rack. Because again, they're thinking probably maybe their parents had gotten an exercise bike at one time in the past, or they go to a friend's house and they see that very sad exercise bike in the corner, and they just think, okay, I'm not going to get Peloton because it'll just be like that. All right, imagining use. So when they are kind of like constructing a job to be done in their mind, right? They're thinking about what job is this going to do for me, right? What progress is it going to deliver me? When it comes to actually using it, what will that be like? And so we found that basically, and I'm just have to briefly summarize for the purposes of this 15-minute time zone. But we found that basically imagined use varied amongst the three groups of consumers, which if you think about the diffusion of innovations, this matches pretty well to that. So I guess you would say entrants on the far left would probably be the late adopters, whereas the premium would probably be the early adopters to your diffusion curve. So in this case, entrants, I think Sandy, for example, as I mentioned before, she would be an example of someone entering the market for the first time. Again, it's like, it looks like a gimmick, looks hard to use, not interested, but also all entrants also had to use it first. So they had to use the first bike before they got it, and that's how they first started wanting it. And then they had to figure out how to create a routine around that. So that's like them kind of imagining, if I adopt this thing, what's it going to be like, so on and so forth. I call it low cost. The next group is low cost. These were people who maybe had used, I call it low cost alternatives to Peloton, which I basically mean like maybe the like generic spin class at the local gym that they were just using. And those were people who were just, again, because they weren't having a great spin experience, they had a negative perception of spinning classes, right? You only know what you know, right? So they had a prejudice against it and just didn't really think it would do much for them. But then they were thinking, okay, well, if I do get this thing, then I'm going to have to figure out a new routine. Because again, these were people who, because they never had a great spinning experience, they didn't do a whole lot of spinning. So they were thinking, okay, I'll just use it 3 times a week. But then when they actually got it, they ended up using it every day because, again, they had no idea how amazing these spin classes could be. And then, of course, the last would be the premium people, I call it. These were, again, I think Randy is a good example. So also the other thing, premium people were also all of the consumers who anticipated their needs. So the low cost and the entrants are being reactive, whereas the premium consumers are anticipating, okay, the gyms are probably going to close, or I'm moving. I need to get something to replace my Soul Cycle or my high-end spin class. What am I going to do? And then they thought, okay, I'm going to get the Peloton. It's basically going to be exactly how my current spin class was. And so for them, you know, we talked to them about that. It's like, yeah, here's how I imagined using it, and that's exactly how I use it today. All right, the next process that we studied was novelty assessment. So why would the Peloton stand out to me as new or different? And so when we're kind of talking with consumers about this, about what you would expect, the big screen made it different and new to them. The luxury branding was also new to them. Simulating, and the idea of simulating an in-class experience at home, that was also seemed like a new idea to them. So across all the consumers we talked with, those were pretty much the three things that to them make Peloton stand out or look different. Because otherwise they just said, besides that, it was just another at-home exercise bike. Okay, information foraging. So how are these consumers going out and getting market information? So we found, and again, the most influential by far was word of mouth. People didn't really, you know, the ads. So in this case, you know, the ads, I guess just consumers nowadays are so acclimated to ads, they just only think of ads as basically awareness, making you aware of supply and not really persuasive. Again, everyone that we talked to knew people who had a Peloton bike or went out in some way and asked others. Some people went onto Reddit forums. Some people like would post something on Instagram or ask in Instagram comments like, I saw you bought a Peloton. That's pretty cool. What do you think? Posting to Facebook groups, things of that nature, asking people, hey, I'm seeing people get a Peloton, you know, you have one, why'd you get it? So on and so forth. And then a couple people would, and again, this is interesting, there wasn't a whole lot of shopping, as I mentioned before, because in their mind, Peloton is the only option to them. So if there was any additional information gathering, it would just be simple, well, yeah, I just Googled best spin bike 2020. Or people would say, well, I looked at YouTube video reviews. But again, because there was the choice set was just really just one thing, there was little or no shopping involved. It was really more about, I think I want to get one. Is there a reason why I shouldn't? All right, willingness to pay assessment. So, you know, once consumers, you know, look at the product, construct a job to be done for it, and think, I want that. I want that job to be done. I want to hire that product for that job. How are they now calculating willingness to pay for that? How much is that job to be done worth to me? So in this case, interesting. So the anticipatory consumers, if you remember those, you know, the premium ones, they all thought about, they saw the $2,000 price tag and thought, okay, yeah, sure. No problem. So they were no problem paying for that in their mind. And that's because we asked about that, and they said, well, I'm already spending $400 a month anyway on spin classes, so you know, it makes sense to me. So that was interesting. However, for the entrants, for the other people, you know, the people entering the market for the first time, or maybe people who had experience with low cost alternatives, they actually really struggled with that $2,000 price. And again, if you recall, there was only one choice set. There's only one option. So they couldn't compare it to anything else. No one was comparing the Peloton to anything else. So they had trouble like thinking if $2,000 was a fair price because they had nothing to compare it to. However, because they said that when I saw that the monthly price for it then I could compare that to my gym membership. So now they have a reference for calculating, is this Peloton price fair? And this is kind of really shows how just an amazing kind of intersection of events happen. So you've got consumers who otherwise would look at $2,000 and think, that's crazy. I have nothing to compare that to. I can't even tell if that's fair or not. But then who have had their gym membership taken away and are maybe used to paying $100 or $150 a month on gym. So they're already used to paying that. But then the gym closed. So now that money is just kind of like, they're used to spending it. And so that's not a problem. So now they're thinking, well, I'll just substitute. No problem, right? That's like the same as my gym membership. So the Peloton bike is fine. So I think, and again, when you're thinking about pricing in this, another great example of how you need to kind of really think about how consumers are assessing willingness to pay for this job to be done, which in this case, because they're comparing it to a gym membership, then they're able to kind of make that comparison. Okay, so I'll wrap up with the predicting Peloton willingness to hire. So going future, what are our predictions of when people will adopt a Peloton bike? I mean, that's the whole point of theory, right? Is to predict what will happen next. So some factors. So without a doubt, usually how we do this is when we construct a forecast or we create forecasts about who will actually adopt this product, and we're working with clients to create forecasts of whether or not this product will actually create growth. We kind of like vote, we talk about weights and factors. So I didn't deal with weights for this, so these are just the factors. So basically there's about 8 or so, eight factors, variables, help us predict how someone is more likely to adopt a Peloton bike. And so I'll just go through those. So, of course, has experienced physical or mental fitness regression, right, due to a lack of structured community-based fitness experience. So again, think of those as of course, the anticipators. As you mentioned before, that's very easy to predict. But the next kind of group down is, people who actually have experienced needs related to not working out. Of course, people who are attracted to this idea of group spinning class at home. The at home part is important because, and I'll use Sandy. So Sandy is an example of someone, actually Sandy's purchase of the Peloton bike really had nothing to do with COVID, really. Only reason why it did is because her boyfriend bought one because of COVID and told her to use it. So in her case, and we talked about this, she's like, if I had known about this 2 years ago, I would have bought a Peloton bike sooner. But it was just that for her, the idea of a group class at home, first, she never had a great experience with spin classes, but beyond that, the idea of at home just was not attractive to her for whatever reason. So the consumers have to make that connection. Group spin class at home can be fun. Another big thing, huge predictor here, is are people able to actually understand that the Peloton is not just the bike, it has all these other classes and things too, right? And I'm short on time, so I'll kind of zip through that, but just go look on Peloton, and apparently they have the app. Some people actually said, after I bought the bike, I started using the app, and actually the app is so much more interesting because I get meditation classes and so on and so forth. Of course, experience doing spin classes is another vote for predicting Peloton adoption. A great deal of exposure with the Peloton brand, but also that they don't perceive it as exclusive, but rather as inclusive. So if you're a consumer who looks at Peloton and is like, oh, that's elitist, that's not going to attract you to it. But if you look at Peloton, it's like, oh, I want to join that community of supporting other riders and being motivated, then that will draw you to it. Of course, experience network effects. Huge predictor, right? Had their monthly gym or fitness pause, spend, or canceled. I think that's 100% of the people we talk to experience that. when they're calculating willingness to pay, are able to calculate, okay, I could just be spending this money on the Peloton bike or on my gym. That's it. Hopefully I didn't go, sorry, I wasn't tracking my time. Hopefully I didn't go too much time over.
Great, thank you, Alan. That was fascinating. Thank you so much for walking us through that. There's been some questions come in, but before I go to them, just a few clarifying questions, if that's okay. Was this for Peloton, or was this just an independent piece of research that you and your team did?
Yeah, this is for independent. So not because if I did do it for Peloton, I couldn't be able to talk about it.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Out there. My other clarifying question was, what's your starting point for this? Like, when you think about starting to do the research and do those customer reviews, how do you define the population you're going to research, and is there a customer segment you are specifically looking to understand?
Yeah. So it could be interesting. I can share out, or if people want to contact me afterwards, I can share out the screener that we used. But it's basically people who recently adopted a Peloton bike. Now, what's a little different, and you're going to have Bob on here next week or next month. What I believe is different, or should be done differently, Bob wants to only focus on buying. That's why if you look at his time, he says buying. But to me, I think it's about adopting, not just buying. So I want to talk to people who've built a habit around consuming a product. So we want to talk to people who have recently, hired, right, developed a habit around using a product. So that's who we talk to, and we want to talk to people who did that recently. I think, which was easy in this case, but we usually don't like to go out more than 3 months ago. I adopted the Peloton bike 3 months ago or 4 months ago. That's pretty good because they'll just have better recall of how they constructed that willingness to hire. Because if I talk to someone who did this a year ago, they're basically what they're going to do is they're going to talk about what they find valuable now about the product, not what they found valuable, what they perceive as being valuable going into it. See, I don't care what customers think today because you're already a customer. I don't really care what you think. I care about, well, how are the people who are not my customers? Like, what do they think about this product? Because I want them to become my customers. So we want to, like that. Those are the data we want, not the data from people who are already buying it.
Okay. We've had some questions in on the Q&A, so I'll go with the kind of top voted ones to start with. So Kate M asked, did all of the individuals you spoke to buy a Peloton? So we've answered that. It sounds like they have a really strong alignment on jobs for a core customer set. But I'd be interested to understand what this looks like amongst people who should be customers but aren't currently buying one.
Yep. So I would say that, again, kind of, I guess, going back to before on the prediction part that I mentioned at the very end, and I would say like people like Sandy, again, I like to kind of give a tangible example. It's when people, again, can't either have struggling constructing that willingness to pay, right, that they think is fair, or if they just look at the product and don't understand it or have a misconception of it, or have no experience spinning, they don't know what they don't know. So I think that was probably the most common. For example, let's kind of turn around. If I were Peloton, what would I do? I would encourage more, opening up more stores and encouraging consumers to come out and try it. I don't think you can really do a at-home trial. It's probably too expensive, but you need to figure out things like that. Maybe a stronger push into gyms or something like that. People are going to actually use it and experience the phenomenon, and then they'll start to want it. So I think that was really the biggest observation that we saw that was missing. That would explain why people who are not customers, why people who could be customers are not becoming customers.
Okay. Brian Hohenstein said, did any individuals compare buying a Peloton to doing something other than spinning? For example, building a home gym with free weights, etc.?
Yeah. So interesting. Actually, we found that the people that we talked with, a lot of them use the Peloton as an excuse to build a home gym, which is kind of interesting. So again, there's other stuff too for time constraints that get into it. But a lot of ways, the Peloton became a gateway for creating your own home gym. So we found that people that get the Peloton bike, and then it's like, you know what? Then I bought the weights. Then I bought the mat. Then I bought this after that. Because again, they became, maybe going back to that previous example, I think something else that people who could be Peloton customers but are not are also people who don't think you can have a great at-home gym experience or workout experience. But once they do have that experience, you know what? I can have a good at-home workout experience. Then they're more likely to do more at-home gym stuff. Kind of more directly, because, so I'm going to, the short answer for Brian, I'm going to say no, because there was an important need that people wanted for that job to be done, which is be part of some community. So because and the other thing, like if you go back at the presentation and look at it, like one of the needs was like, I want someone to tell me what to do. I want someone to inspire me to, work harder and to push harder. And so if people are, riding their bike by themselves or just jumping on an exercise bike by themselves, they're not having that need resolved. So that's why people would not consider, well, I'll just go out and bicycle instead, because they wanted that like motivate me need.
Yeah, sure. And that kind of relates to one of the questions that I had, which was you talked about the competitive set, and Peloton really didn't have much in the way of competition. And I wondered why you thought that was. You talked a bit about the community element there, because there's lots of bikes out there, and one of the big advantages of using Jobs to be Done is it allows you to understand what market you're actually in. Peloton aren't in the market for exercise bikes. So what market are they in, and have they created a new market disruption, as kind of Clayton Christensen would have defined it?
Yeah, so I would say that if you want to define it, it's so, if you were to break out those needs individually, then you could make an argument that there was competition for it. But so to kind of back up, the choice set construction, that was not our interpretation. We asked everybody. We said, what else did you look at besides Peloton bike, or, what did you actually, switch from? That's when people say like, well, I looked at this, I looked at that, and zero. It was just, well, the Peloton, that was it. And I think it's because it's that unique combination of needs. It's at home, I'm summarizing the need for brevity, but it's like at home, spinning, community, and someone motivating me. Like, so you need to find a product or a solution that hits all those needs. And right now, in these minds as consumers, only Peloton could do that.
Yeah, sure. And so it's competing with the personal trainer, it's competing with the community run you did in the park, it's competing with a variety of different methods of exercising other than just spin classes and just
well it could maybe outside of COVID times, but not now. Like there was no other competition for this. That was really, it's like, I'll get a Peloton bike or do nothing. That was literally it.
Okay. That relates to kind of a question that Anna's got here as well. She said, did buying a Peloton serve a job that went beyond exercise? E.g., could some people have bought a Peloton because they were bored or craved a dopamine hit online shopping or needed some kind of social interaction?
Yep. So if you go back and actually, I still have my screen shared, right?
Yep.
So if you go back and look at the needs, they're actually, someone about having fun. So people actually, and part of the kind of need there was similar to that. And actually, did someone have a structure? Well, I put it into mentally fit. We kind of bucket that into it. But like we had some people talk about, this experience of I've lost structure in my life right now. So and so that's, like this one woman was talking about, I'm like watching TV at 1 a.m. and I know that this is not good for me. And so she's like, I also saw the Peloton. One of the needs I was attaching to it was it's going to help me bring some structure, and that was going to help me, be as mentally fit as I should be. Or, again, kind of, I think what you're alluding to also here is they began to see it, or they anticipating it as a fun experience too. So that was another, I think, need that's not directly related to, the need around physically fit. It was like, look, I need another way to have fun. I mean, I'm indoors all day. I need some other way of having fun. So for them, they thought the Peloton bike could serve that need.
Great. We've got some more questions, but we're going to have to move on.
Okay.
There's a couple of questions from Ryan Gamble and Alf around kind of your view on jobs to be done and your approach and methodology and stuff like that. But I think we'll have you and Yann talking about that after Yann's talk. I want to make sure we have time for Yann to
Yep.
talk.
Yeah, I mean, we can go back.
Ryan, Alf, we'll pull those up again.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. So I think we can then still, I mean, the questions are there, and then if there's time and people still enjoy the talk, so we can go back to them. Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, I think I can't share my screen while you're still sharing. So yeah, thanks. All right. So thanks everybody for being here, and thank you again, Ryan, for having us. So what I'm going to talk about is a project we launched, which unfortunately only works well in writing. So you can't really pronounce the home office works as it is there, because it's weird to pronounce it that way, but that's the way we call the project. And it's basically a project, and I'll explain it much more in detail later on, about the pain points of new office workers. Before I do that, let me just, because we're not so well known, just say a few words about VentBridge, and so you get an idea of what that is. So I work at VentBridge, and I have been for quite some time now. And what we do is really we spin growth initiatives to success. That is our main ambition. That is what we do. We consider ourselves leading in jobs to be done. I mean, that's always up to debate, but that's what we claim. And we've done more than 100 projects, including a quantitative validation of jobs to be done. And I will focus in my talk on what that means and what we found out about it. We help larger, like F1000 companies and technology startups. So we're in different worlds as well. They use our methods and tools for the value positioning, what we call idea sharpening. So really finding what works with customers, building service blueprints, or really laying down a customer foundation if that's necessary for different purposes. Also, we're offering on the project job to be done coaching for innovation teams. So that's kind of what we do and what VentBridge has been doing over the past years. So to give you a flavor of what those 100 jobs means, it's always nice to have some pictures at the start. So this is kind of to give you a little bit of a flavor of what the jobs were that we were lucky enough to investigate. And it starts with something really nice on the upper left with collecting art, and goes down to really the hardworking operating a power plant on the very right. So this is just to give you a little bit of a flavor. And I think you can also see then later on what kinds of understanding of jobs to be done and what flavor in there is. And what I'm going to do is focus on the job that kind of, as we said, we are all doing, like the literal job. And the question of our home office works study was, what are the pain points of newborn home office workers? Because what did to office workers, what did COVID do? It radically changed the circumstances of the job to get your work done. So of course, everybody who's here has had that experience. You work in an office, then the COVID measures and lockdown gets into place, and that radically changes the circumstances of how you get your work done. And it pushes you into working from home or from another location where you're not in the office. And we thought that's a great opportunity to really capture the pains of the newborn home office workers. So what has the change in circumstance done to the job? And I will talk a little bit about that. First of all, There were four key reasons why we launched this project. So the first one, and I'll say a little bit more about this later on, was really to give the community, the Jobs to be Done community, kind of a behind the scenes insights on how we apply it. And there's different ways of doing Jobs to be Done, and we just kind of wanted to open our books and let them know how we do it. So we did several meetups in Zurich where they kind of could watch what we do, and we explained it. But they also contributed, and I will then show on in what sense. The second one was to give companies inputs that help the newborn office, home office workers to perform. The third one, of course, is to propagate Jobs to be Done thinking in general, and of course our approach. But it's also nice, as the fourth reason, to keep ourselves kind of maybe not on top, but at least involved in the discussion. So it has a motivating effect, and you're always looking out for it, and it keeps you talking about it, because that's just it's a topic that everybody is talking about, and it's always nice to be investigated yourself. Okay, so how do we do it? Usually when we apply Jobs to be Done, we do this in the 4 phases that you see there. The 4 phases are frame, discover, spin, and develop. So at the beginning, you have to frame the Jobs to be Done project. What is it about? What is actually the job you want to try to focus on? You go into the discovery. That is 2 steps. You do a qualitative exploration, and then you validate it quantitatively, depending on the needs of the project. And then we go into spinning. So that means taking the results of the discovery phase and spinning ideas or projects that are there to match the pain points that we found in the market. And then the last step is developing actually the solutions. So what you see on the very, very right are those meetup bubbles and design thinking camp bubbles. So these were moments where we kind of opened our books and invited the community, the Job to be Done community in. So they helped us build the first hypothesis of what actually the Job to be Done looks like or could look like. They helped us with the target group definition, and they helped us recruit people that we could talk to. So what we did is, first in the discovery, we talked to 25 people, did an interview with 25 people to uncover what we call value metrics, and you will see in a moment what that is. And they helped us then as well to recruit, so about 142 people to identify the pain points. So we have the qualitative exploration that we then went on to validate. What I will be focusing on is that part. So really the quantitative validation and what that means and what we found. So first of all, what does quantification mean, or how do we understand this? So on the left-hand side, you rather see the qualitative part. So what we call the Jobs to be Done hierarchy, which is always a core job, and then it has an up and down level and a left to right axis, as it were. And what we focused on is of course the core job to work. That's the literal job that people actually have. In the circumstance X means we looked at how do people experience it now in their new circumstances at home, and how does that compare to the office situation. Now, what we do beyond talking and validating the Jobs to be Done hierarchy is uncover what we mean, what we call value metrics. So in the middle there, you see the value metric number 33, which is associated with the step work. Is one of those value metrics to be as sure as possible which projects have to be prioritized in the next few months. So what is that value metric? This is one of many, and in fact we uncovered 69 of those, one of many metrics that the customers have, or people just have, to judge the value of a solution as a function of their job. So as it were, in the circumstance of working at home, how well are you able to make sure to know which projects have to be prioritized in the next few months? So that is something somebody has said that's important to them. In the qualitative phase, we take that value metric and we put it in an online survey, and out comes on the right that's a pain point. Now, what does a pain point mean in our terms? It means it's for many, many people that is quite important. So being sure which projects are prioritized over the next few months is quite important to many people. So it's about 7.5. So that means 75% of the people found that very important. but only about 3.5, so 35% of the people are fulfilled or satisfied with it. So that is what we call a pain point. It's one value metric that for many people is very important, but they're not fulfilled. It's not fulfilled. They don't have yet, they are not satisfied with it at the moment. That's our definition of a pain point. And on the upper right, you will see some maps later on. We call this an essential. So these would be the needs that are very important, but are already satisfied. That's what quantification means. And I will show a little bit what we found. Now, I'll focus on one key finding, and it's about bees and butterflies. So that might sound a little bit strange at the beginning, but you will see what we mean by this from time to time. And I think you can start wondering yourself what you might be. So bees and butterflies are, as it were, two kinds of home office workers, two types of home office workers. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the bees. Working from home is perfect for bees. Bees, they're very structured. So we mean people, but that's a metaphor. Bees, they are very structured. They're very systematic. They know what they do. They go from one task to the next. They usually are quite tidy, and they end their day. They don't have that issue of starting or ending their day, right? So that is an issue we found in the qualitative phase, but rather associated with the butterflies. They don't know when it really starts, and they have a hard time stopping working when they are at home. Now, these are the bees, so really structured working bees, more systematic. On the other hand, there's butterflies. Now, butterflies are more like, they go from one flower to the next, and then they come back. They're much more creative. They work at several tasks at once. They are more communicative and inspiring. And for them, working from home is really, really hard. So what we'll go through now is a little bit make this more tangible. So this is like a description in general, and I'll show how they differ in their pain points and how they might be the same. And that's what I will focus on. Is one of the key findings of that quantitative study. So that's these three questions that I'm going to dive into. How do they differ? In what respect are they the same? And then I'll just talk a little bit about the insights beyond the bee and butterfly distinction. So first of all, we have this. So these are the two value maps for the bees on the left and the butterflies on the right. As you can see, we have about 76 bees and about 51 butterflies in the sample. It's mostly Swiss and German people, just so knowing how you can generalize this. And the first finding that we have whenever we look at such two maps is they differ strongly in the median fulfillment. So the cross means, so the line always means either 50% of the value metrics are above, or 50% of the value metrics are below, or 50% of the value metrics are on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side. So that's what defines the cross, where actually the middle is. And on the first sight, you can clearly see there is a difference between butterflies and bees. Butterflies are much less satisfied than the bees. Now that's a kind of a purely formal way of looking at it, and I will go through some of the pain points where they really differ. So what are these points actually, and how are they for the bees and how are they for the butterflies? So let's take the first one. Be measured by the result of work, not by attendance time. So that was something that was brought up in the qualitative phase, and for bees, that's an essential. It's, yes, that's important to them, but apparently that's quite solved. That's okay. They're fine. And butterflies, that it seems, they really hate being measured by attendance time. So for them, it's apparently quite important to be measured by the result of their work, not if they're there at 8 o'clock and click or if they are on time. So attendance time is something, being measured by attendance time is something that is really a pain point for them. The same is then if you look at co-workers should manage themselves. So we found in the qualitative phase very strongly that some people have, okay, now it's the time we have to step up and workers have to start managing themselves. That is really important for the bees, so that everyone gets really organized and they start managing themselves, whereas butterflies don't really care. So this seems to, if you stretch it a little bit, say that bees have an expect or rather strict work ethic, and butterflies are more on the result focus or more result oriented. For them, it's the output. Now, what other differences are there? This is something we found very, very interesting. So in a sense, bees struggle with reading emotional clues. So here we are talking about mostly remote conversations, so over video calls. Bees seem to struggle with reading emotional cues, while the struggle for butterflies is sending them out. So if you look at the upper one, to assess the emotional state of the person you are talking to, that's a pain point for the bees. So that is something that's important to them. They want to be able to assess the emotional state, but they don't seem to manage. So it seems to be hard for them. Whereas for the butterflies, that is neither important nor fulfilled. So we call this a sleeper. That's really, that apparently isn't the problem. Rather, what the problem for the butterflies is assessing how what you say is being received. So that's kind of a very interesting, we think, maybe distinction in terms of empathy or how that plays out. And just maybe the last really strong difference. So inside versus outside, internal projects and topics. For butterflies, that's really a distraction. So what they really want to do is they don't right now at the moment want to focus on internal projects, but rather on the market and how that has changed. For bees, that seems to be fine. That seems not even to be a problem. So that is just to give you a little bit of a sense on how they actually differ and how we came up on the description of the bees and the butterflies. In what area are they the same, right? So they are not just completely different and not just two very separate groups. They are the same in terms of alignment as a key pain area. So this isn't unique to the bees and the butterflies. No matter how you look at the data that we gather, alignment is really, really a pain area. So that was difficult before, and we know that alignment has always been an issue for many, many organizations and teams already, but we believe that it's gotten even worse. It's even stronger, and both bees and butterflies see that. So the key pain point for almost no matter how you look at the data is noticing as early as possible when others are working in a completely different direction. So once you're at home, it's much harder to assess if you're not aligned, if you start working in a completely different direction. The same is with the prioritization. So what is actually a priority in the next couple of months, and the loss of efficiency because tasks and expectations are not clearly formulated. So that's a shared pain area. They both struggle with this, which seems to indicate that that's a problem for everybody. And what is also very nice, both agree that, well, very nice. That's just one way in which they are the same. COVID-19, they both agree, will change customer behavior and markets, but they both don't know how. So in a sense, they both want to address newly emerged customer needs. They want to identify and adapt the assumptions they need to change, but they don't know which ones. So that is, again, this for both, for the bees and the butterflies, that's a pain point or a pain area. And in that respect, so they are the same. Okay, that was a bit of a tour, as it were, around bees and butterflies to give you a little bit of an idea of how they differ. So what we learned is butterflies are much less satisfied. Alignment is a key pain area for both. Bees, they rather have and expect a strict work ethics, and butterflies are a little bit more relaxed. Bees struggle with reading emotional cues, while butterflies struggle with sending them out. Internal projects and topics, that's a distraction, purely or almost purely a distraction for the butterflies. And COVID-19 will change customers and markets. That's where they, as it were, agree. So what can we draw from this? What does it all mean, or what could this mean in terms of the future of work? Now, one thing that is pretty clear that's also not very surprising is what we think is 100% remote is just an illusion. So butterflies suffer way too much. That is not going to be something they actually like, working 100% remote, and bees are much too disconnected from the team. So also in terms of the key pain area of alignment, which they both share. Now, what it also says that organizations and teams that smartly balance tasks and remote office days amongst the employees, they can actually increase productivity. Because it's not the case that remote is something that, or working from home is something that is a danger to productivity, as we all have probably experienced, but it's a question of how you balance it. What we actually think as well, and we talked about this before we started the talk, is the job the office addresses has to change. So the office must enable even more, or even help even more in terms of human connection, collaboration to address the alignment issues. So this key pain area of alignment is really something a new kind of office could really solve, and could. But for that, offices must look different. Then the last point, COVID-19, I think we probably all experienced it, can also have a unifying power, or really bring us together. But that, of course, is always a thin line that could also quickly shatter. All right. So maybe just to then wrap it up, so I'll say a little bit something more about bees and butterflies, and then I'll give a little bit of hints what else we found out. Friendly message for the bees out there: if you identify more with the bees, an informal exchange is not just an inefficiency, so why not see it as an alignment tool? And kind of for the butterflies, the message is rather, look, internal projects and topics, yes, they're sometimes boring, but they also build a common identity. So that's kind of if you're a bee or a butterfly, that would be kind of our friendly message. Just quickly to wrap it up, the bee and butterfly distinction is one thing that we found, one thing that we thought was very interesting, and there's of course more. The trouble is this: predictions are very hard, especially about the future. So we kind of brought up 3 more findings from the study that I just wanted to share and have some possible implications then on the right. So one is the one I just presented. So these 2 kind of home office worker types, the bees and the butterflies. The second one is that already came through a little bit: collaborating remotely is an empathy killer. So that is really something that we see in the data. It's really hard to connect, to keep up motivation, or to have a creative work when you actually work together remotely. The third point that we see in the data as well is a kind of a funny mirror image of office and the home. So the office is apparently quite bad for focus. People get distracted when they are in the office, but it's great for motivation. So the distraction is your co-workers and friends. On the other hand, the home seems to be very, very good for focus. So focused work is very well done at home, but it's bad for motivation. So it drains on you to work from home, and probably we've experienced that as well. One other insight that we found is, yes, so we looked at the difference between parents and other household situations. Having kids at home makes working from home really hard. That is absolutely true, and you can see that in the data very nicely. But so does living alone. So that's just one part where we kind of think the discussion is a little bit silent. We focus very much on those who have kids, which is an issue. Which is just something that makes working from home hard, but so is living alone. On the right, we have possible implications. So I already went through some of those. 100% remote is an illusion. We have to, I think, all improve the way we show empathy in an online context that is different than in an offline context. And I think we still need to learn how to do that. The third one seems to be the one I already said. So redefine the role of the office. It's what home office has caused for us is really it put into question the job of the office. So that's something that suddenly now has opened up again. What actually is the job of an office? And then the fourth one, of course, is balancing then the contradiction of the office as a focus space for parents, because we've seen many parents that now go to the office to actually be focused and have a quiet space, versus a meeting place for the singles. So that could be one of the possible implications. These are just conversation starters. It's very hard to actually predict how this plays out, but it would be nice to hear and see what you have to say. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Thank you, Yann. That was really interesting. I think a lot of people can identify with the bees and butterflies. It was very nice. I like that. You are dealing with a very, very, very topical topic at the minute, and there's a lot of people asking the question of what the jobs to be done of the office kind of post-COVID is at the minute. And you know, this topic is also quite divisive.
Yes, I imagine.
um, and so there's lots of questions coming in. But do you have a sense about what the main role of the office should be once we're all allowed to kind of congregate and travel again, and we've not got social distancing in place, and we've maybe settled down into a bit of a, I hate to use the phrase, new normal?
Yeah, so I think it goes into the direction that I was at least trying to aim at. So I think what we see now is that yes, it's hard, but apparently it works without being at the office. So for some people, I think it came back as in terms of so they struggle with keeping up the routine when they work from home, but that's more or less manageable. So I think going into the future, for some companies, it could really make sense to rethink the role the office has, not primarily as a place where you just work, but what kinds of tasks does it actually make sense to have to bring the people together? So it should be a place where, I mean, the focus work, things that you have to concentrate on, or do you have to be really a silent environment, the office seems to be very bad at this. So people probably, but the home situation is very good for that. What the office could be in our review is much more of a motivational, that really bringing the team together and helping in collaborating and working together. So what we see is working at home that drains on your motivation, but being in the office that's a motivating factor. So it's that, I think that social aspect, which is not just an inefficiency, which is not just something that's not work, but it really helps in terms of alignment. So if it would go in that direction, I think the office would do a good job. I don't know if that helps or answers the question.
Yeah, no, I mean, it certainly helps. There's a question here from KM about, I'd be interested to understand if there were any major differences between managers and non-managers.
Ah, that's a nice one. Yeah. So we looked at the difference of people that have team responsibility, so that are actually leading a group of people, and people that don't. And there are differences. So let me just think a little bit so I don't say the wrong thing. I think the key element that we found is, in a sense, the problems are experienced by the people who don't have team responsibility, but the leaders still kind of have the hope of everything is going to go back. So all those alignment issues, all those issues of understanding each other, and there was one in there which was very nice. For example, that people don't get overlooked. So you're in a big meeting, there are big people, there's many people on the call. If you don't have team responsibility, you seem to have the impression that people get overlooked. They want to say something, but whoever leads the meeting doesn't let them speak. For team leaders, that's not an issue at all. So it's kind of our message there would be a little bit of a wake-up call. I think many team leaders now have actually heard it. So we did the study was in June, July, something like that. So I think there a lot has happened, but it's really kind of a wake-up call for team leaders. So the problems are there, and it's not going to go back to how it was before.
And I'd be interested to see if we can do a mix of remote and in the office. I always found that personally quite difficult pre-COVID, but that was before we got conditioned to making sure onto Zoom and all of those things.
Yeah.
Yes. Anna has a question here. She says, the quantitative portion of this approach appears to depend on people self-reporting in a survey. What's important for them to be productive? How good are people at self-reporting on what they need to be productive? Do people know what they need to be productive, or could they sometimes be wrong? When we're running quantitative research for jobs to be done, is there anything we can do to mitigate self-reporting bias?
Yes and no. So in a sense, of course, you always have that problem. So you always have the issue that people, that they report in a different way, or they maybe say what is socially acceptable. That's just a fact, and I think we have to factor that in. On the other hand, it really depends on how you ask them, and it really depends specifically on how you formulate the question. So it's not the case that just because that can occur, you cannot make it manageable. And I think where people are really bad at is judging solutions. So if you present them, if let's say, for example, what would you think about Zoom adds the feature X? And then that's really hard because they have to imagine something that they don't experience. But if you ask them what we call value metrics, they're completely free of a solution. We don't tell you how to do it. They don't, or they're linked to a certain job, but they're not linked to a certain solution. And there we tend to think that people are quite able to give a good answer, and they're rather honest, or it's a numbers game then in the end. So people, yes, they tend sometimes to give different answers, but at a certain amount of people, you overcome the ones that just, that lie to themselves.
As always, there's always people in this community that have lots of questions about kind of approach to jobs to be done and methodology and all of those things. So I'd like to kind of bring Alan back into the conversation here. There's a couple of questions from Alf, and I'm worried that Alf is getting a bit concerned that Alan has changed his or upgraded his view about jobs to be done, as he says in the comments. And he says, can you take 1 minute just to ask Alan, could you summarize his new view on jobs to be done, if it indeed is new, Alan?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to Zoom kind of hid my thing. Ryan, do you hear me all right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I see you so I can talk. So what's been happening over the last, I would say, more intensely the last year, is actually doing more of an more research, as I mentioned before, like the Peloton thing, where it's because we don't have to have the constraints of working with a client. We can just do our own research and do it really fast. Like that Peloton study was 4 days, right? 4 days of working. So we can execute that really fast, but also getting better at conducting experiments. So that's something that we've been doing also, because that's the only way you really know. Like that's how you build a theory. That's the whole point of science, right? Is you conduct an experiment and you construct a hypothesis and did this work or not? And so as we've been doing that, we've been learning more. So yes, things have been getting upgraded for sure, because we've been learning, conducting experiments that kind of falsify some ideas and strengthen others, while also doing new types of research that reveal anomalies that perhaps a previous model did not explain. So like for example, I'll use the Sandy example. So she was an example of this phenomenon, right, where we describe as consumers as agents of imperfect information. That's actually what that person was talking about, the danger associated with self-assessment surveys, is that, that whole methodology, that voice of the customer methodology was designed to study machines, and machines know everything about themselves. But humans don't know everything about themselves. They only know what they've experienced in the past. And so once we kind of discover this phenomenon, fancy words are ergodic, but this idea of irreversible time, that consumers are learning more as they progress through time, we observe that phenomenon, and then we go out and we test it, and we actually can we create a job to be done, for example? Or can we show things to consumers that change what they want, change their willingness to pay, things like that. And since we're able to do that, that kind of matches the observation with an experiment that proves the prediction. So that's kind of my longer answer. So it's a yes, we have been changing and updating things, but we've been doing that through, continued observation and experiments.
And I think from my perspective, that's quite important as well. Humans are probably one of the most complex things you can try to understand. It behave in all sorts of unpredictable ways, and so having a kind of a revisionist approach to your ways of understanding human behavior, I think is an important open-minded perspective to have.
Yeah. And if I could, Ryan, I'm sorry. If I could just real quick, I just remembered the answer. If I had to sum it up, I don't think I actually answered that properly. I would say that we are now thinking more about the heuristics that consumers use to construct that willingness to hire. That's what we're focusing at right now. So if I had to kind of sum up, what's the kind of new way or interest in thinking about jobs research, that's kind of what we're thinking about now, right? What are the heuristics that shoppers and consumers use to create a job to be done, look at it, and then determine willingness to hire.
Right. Yann, you were about to say something.
Yeah, well, I think it's always a big discussion, and where I completely agree, and I think where we also kind of develop things further, because that's what a good theory should do, is keep on evolving, is absolutely with the complexity. So if you remember the hierarchy that we showed, I mean, that's kind of a model that we use, and it's a rather simplified, I showed a simplified version of what we actually used and what the actual result was. But it has many different axes, and it's kind of a one way of how we see. It's a tool for us to actually understand where which bit of what job and what job step fits, and that is much more complex than just, I don't know, a 3 or 4 step approach. And there are also things that we know that we don't capture that are just related to a step, but that's, any good model is never reality itself. Now, for us, as it were, the willingness to hire is a kind of a, I mean, we would always link that back to what a pain point is. So what you need is a promise to solve my pain. That's when I'm going to move. That's when I'm going to buy. That's when I'm going to listen to you. That's why we're so focused on finding out what is actually the pain. And the quantitative part is most related to the question, okay, what are you going to do later on? So if you, for example, have quite a big investment down the road, you need to be a little bit more sure than just talking to 20 people. And that's kind of a way of making sure that your assumptions are better than just the qualitative part. With all the discussions, with all the constraints, with all the issues that come with quantitative studies themselves, that's, yeah. So we have a saying where when we show these things that we usually work in is, market research is the worst of all methods to find out the truth besides all others. So yeah, it's never just, we build a model, and models are always false in a certain way, but they help you to do some things. And sometimes it's good to have that model and to have that reassurance that 500 people said that and not the other thing. So that's a little bit how we see it.
Yeah, I agree. And if you're kind of using jobs to be done to inform product design, then actually carrying those jobs through into a product iteration cycle and do some user testing and start to test on those jobs as well as some of the kind of design patterns that you've used is actually incredibly helpful for deepening your understanding of the jobs to be done you're solving and how you go about solving them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the question is always there also, I mean, that you always, that's why we put quite some emphasis on the frame, on the first part of our approach on framing, because you have to answer the question of what job you want jobs to be done to do for you, right? So we see it as a way of thinking. It's kind of a way of thinking, and then the application and what you want it to do and it's that you have to decide first. So what is it actually? What is the job that you want job to be done to do for you? So that's yeah, that's always an open, and there are different things. So if you go more into the questions of positioning, for example, then the approach might be slightly different than if you go into the, as it were, nitty-gritty details of optimizing the next generation of a product.
I've been so focused at reading the questions in the Q&A that I forgot to look at who's been raising their hands. Sorry, it's not very experienced doing this moderating, but Carmen's got a hand. So, Carmen, you should be able to talk now if you want to ask your question. You're on mute, by the way.
Sorry, no, I was not raising my hand. I'm sorry, I just touched my phone in the wrong way. Sorry about that.
Now you have to ask a question.
Hear your voice anyway, Carmen. Well. Okay, I'll go back to the...
You said my name and I was like, what?
Brilliant. I love it. Okay.
There is one beautiful metric in there which says to predict the moment at which you have to talk in a meeting. So that was something that some people brought up because they have a meeting and they sit in front of their computer, they turn the camera off and are eating, but they have to know exactly when they probably have to speak. So predicting that moment when you have to kind of push it all away and then, yeah, okay. So.
Max Johnson asks, do you think if it is interesting to connect Blue Ocean strategy with jobs to be done in the construction phases?
So I'll have to admit that I don't know enough about Blue Ocean. Maybe actually, Ryan, could you comment on that? I mean, I'm familiar with the term. I have the book, which is here, right here. I haven't read it though, but I don't know how to answer this question.
I don't know much about Blue Ocean strategy.
Okay. So, you know, if you message me on Twitter or LinkedIn, maybe you can even, we could do a follow-up on that. That might be the best way, because then I can get to learn about Blue Ocean too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if you have any experience with Blue Ocean.
Well, I think it's good to leave it there. So, but I think the question is interesting because, I mean, in a certain sense, if you ask, if I remember that correctly, it's a question of getting out of the red ocean, right? So moving to the blue ocean is a question of getting out of the red ocean. But that is probably more a solution focused question, but it would of course be interesting. So how to move in a space where there's no competition, as it were.
The only thing that I could say is that, yeah, that's kind of reminding me a little bit. Part of the issue that you will have just with any kind of consumer research is that there is no objective way to define the market, especially since markets are complex dynamical systems that are always changing. So even if you were to come up with the market, 6 months later, it's going to change, or depends how volatile your market is. So I guess that's the only thing that I would, you know, when answering this question, even thinking about it, you have to think about, well, what perspective are you defining the market from? Are you taking it using product categories? Are you defining it based upon the type of choice sets that consumers make? You know, how you doing that? That's my only kind of warning in that.
There's definitely a future blog post there, isn't there? Thanks, Max. Got time for one last question. I think we are pushing times a bit. Eduardo Hernandez, one of the characteristics of jobs to be done is that they should be consistent over time. So the jobs people have pre-COVID, they should still have. Does this mean that the reason people switch to a new solution for those jobs is more about the constraints or anxieties, or did COVID create new jobs to be done? How do you think about this?
Who wants to go first?
So I think you can go first, but I don't mind. So I think I tend to agree. I mean, the question of stability over time of a job is a question of what level are you at. So in what sense, in our hierarchy, that's the model we used to think, where are you at? Because the the more concrete you get, the more you get to the lower how, the faster it changes, because you're getting closer and closer to solutions. So that's a little bit. So in general, it's maybe a little bit difficult to answer that question. My take on this is, and I think that's also kind of a difference in how people see jobs to be done, is that new jobs are created rather rarely. I think that's probably a key difference in how we understand the method. But I mean, I'll let you say how you see things. So yes, I would say that what COVID does, at least in our research, is it changed the circumstances. It changed the circumstances of how a job can be performed, and that then changes, as it were, the solution space. So that's maybe our way of looking at things.
Yeah.
So for me, so there's a few things we have to ask ourselves. Like, for example, are there more products that exist today than 5,000 years ago? I would say yes. So just kind of objectively, there are probably millions,
that's probably
hundreds of
true.
millions of products or whatever, right? So there obviously must have been some way of, however you define anything about jobs or motivations to buy something, there's obviously some sort of objective way of saying there's obviously more of something. I think perhaps maybe, usually when people ask this question, I think what's stable are core human goals, things like belonging, a desire for control, recognition, safety, things of that nature. So I think those goals are permanent, or that's part of what makes us human. Right? That's why I can relate to another human and like not a dog, because a dog has a different goal construction than a human. That's why, even back in time, in the year 500, someone plucked out of Western Europe could still probably relate to someone plucked out of Japan, because they both will agree, well, murder's wrong and stealing's wrong and so on and so forth. So I do think that there are goals that are consistent throughout time, but I would say like how those goals get achieved and maintained, and maybe the instantiation of that goal does change. And so what I would say is that COVID-19, this thing, it caused people, in some ways, by taking away their supply, or in other ways too, gave them new goals to strive towards. So then I would say that, for those people, when they looked at the Peloton, it's a new job to be done for them. It's something new that they were considering for the first time. Something else too. So again, looking back at observations helps us too. Sandy, again, I'll use her again. She's a great example. The first, if you asked her, like, what's the job to be done at Peloton? Like, what job is that doing for you? If you had asked that to her a year ago, she'd be like, oh, that's like for like bougie rich people who like want to be elitist. So in her mind, that's the job to be done. But then once she used the bike and actually consumed it and realized, here's what it can do for me, then it was a new job to be done. So to me, it goes back to how much information does that consumer have about their life, their circumstances, and about products, and then how does that affect these jobs to be done that they construct when they look at a product.
I'll just build on that a little bit. We did some research in the US amongst small business owners trying to manage their business finances. And we did it just before, we finished the research in February. So the timing of it was like perfect, just before COVID hit, just before lockdowns started, and small businesses were hugely affected. And so we had a set of jobs to be done for those small business owners pre-pandemic. And the key thing there was that, they struggled to manage their cash flow. They struggled to leverage the data they have within their business to make good, sound kind of financial decisions for their business. And we've been going back to some of the people that we spoke to pre-pandemic, just to find out, how things might have changed. And, there's some obvious answers in that, the pandemic hit and cash flow became a huge issue for them. It was the thing that they kind of focused the most on because it was the survival of their business. But if they start to think a little bit more long term, and they kind of get out of the immediate need to survive, then I think big shifts and big events like COVID can make people that have been through that experience think differently about some of the things that they might prioritize for the financial side of their business, like having a bit more of a kind of financial safety net. You know, businesses, you know, kind of rely on loans and lending and working capital as a way to kind of get through some of those tough patches. But actually, should they be building up more reserves, and should they kind of be making them more shock proof to kind of black swan events like COVID? Yeah, probably. But the interesting thing is that kind of reprioritization of that job to be done, that because now becoming more significant for them, is that going to persist over time, or will our memory degrade of the experience we went through with COVID, and actually, you know, those things around, you know, kind of cash flow and future forecasting and using data to kind of help them manage their business and stuff, will they kind of resurface as the main things? But yeah, I think it's for me it's a bit of both. Jobs do stay the same over time, but certainly big shifts in context and circumstance create new ones. And I think, to Alan's point, you know, we have so many more products and services today than we did, you know, 10, 50, 100 years ago. So, yeah. Well, thank you, Alan and Yann, so much for your time and sharing your work with us. It was very, very interesting. Thank you, everyone on the call, for coming and listening to this and posting your questions in the Q&A. It was a really, really good discussion. We have recorded this, so I will send out the recording to the Meetup email list. So make sure that you're subscribe to the alerts on there to get the recording. But thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope to see you soon.